Hi everyone. So my name is John Clayo A. Jasa from BPED 4A. And I will be your lecturer for the field study. Field study is a very practical course. And of course, it is encouraged that you ask pre-service teachers who are currently taking the field study must have enough or sufficient knowledge on professional education courses such as curriculum development, child and adolescent development of learners, classroom management, because the field study is actually a very practical. Or since it is an engagement of pre-service teachers to the teaching world, the teaching and learning life, especially to the life of teachers inside and outside the classroom. So, I divided the lecture into 12 episodes. So, we will be discussing field study on 12 episodes. But this will just be a brief discussion on several concepts because prior to taking field study, you should have been or you should have taken the professional education's courses that are required prior to taking this course. Okay, what is field study? I think field studies involve collecting data outside of an experimental or lab setting. This type of data collection is most often done in natural settings or environments and can be done in a variety of ways for various disciplines. And of course, field studies are known to be expensive and timely. However, the amount and diversity of the data collected can be invaluable. Many educationists, such as Pestalozzi, Floribel, Dewey, etc., have been influenced by these fields and applied many of the ideas expressed therein in their teaching practice. Okay, this field study it allows us as students to participate in the design of education activity and to acquire experience, of course, and knowledge through the research process. According to Kern and Carpenter, year 1984, and of course we have Moles, year 1988. So let's go to the introduction of field study. These slides is meaning field study trips can range from short walks in the schoolyard or nearby neighborhood to vehicle excursions over some distance for several hours to a full day. Whatever the destination, the purpose of the field study trip should be to address specific outcomes in the curriculum. Field studies should be designed as learning experiences that are integral parts of a unit or theme being studied in the classroom. Okay. An effective field study requires careful planning for meaningful learning experiences before, during, and after the field study trip. A field study is a general method for collecting data about users' needs, and product requirements that involves observation and interviewing. Data are collected about task flows, inefficiencies, and the organizational and physical environments of users. That's it. So we have examples of field studies. So number one is flexible user tests in the field. So meaning, from the word flexible user tests in the field, usability testing is the process of testing your product with real people, right? By getting them to complete a list of tasks while observing or noting their interactions. The goal of conducting usability testing is to understand if your design is usable and intuitive enough for users to accomplish their goals. However, the benefits of usability testing extend beyond testing functionality is usability. More than that, it helps you really grasp the use cases of your product and understand your audience and build a good product. So we have for the number two, customer visits. It means customer visit can provide the credit department with significant and valuable information about a business and its operations. The credit professionals receives a first-hand glimpse into the customer facilities such as inventory, condition of equipment and location. So we have another one is number three, direct observation. For this direct observation is a method of research where the researcher watches and records the activities of individuals or group engaged in their daily activities. The observation may be unstructured or structured. Unstructured observation involve the research observing people and events and recording his or her observation as field notes. Observations are recorded holistically and without the aid of predetermined guide or protocol. Structured observation is also, on the other hand, is a technique where a researcher observes people and events using a guide or set protocol that has been developed ahead of time. Okay, for the number four, ethnographic research. Ethnographic research, this is a study through direct observation of users in their natural environment rather than in a lab. The objective of this type of research is to gain insights into how users interact with things in their natural environment. This research provides an in-depth insight into the user's views and actions along with the sights and sounds they encounter during their day. It provides also the researcher with an understanding of how those users see the world and how they interact with everything around them. And lastly, we have number five, contextual inquiry. Okay, for this contextual inquiry is literary inquiry of context. It is a method where participants are observed while they perform tests and simultaneously talk about what they are doing while they perform them. Okay, contextual inquiry is not just a traditional interview or ethnographic observation method. The key difference between contextual inquiry and other user research methods is that participants must take a more active role in leading their session and contextual. Let's now proceed to another topic that fields research is usually done with one of the following goals in mind. Number one, we have gather task information. So this gather task information, you can find out how people do things today and why they do them in particular ways before proposing something new, right? Early design research can help prevent big mistakes when creating products and services. And we have the number two, understand peoples. Yes, it is very important to understand people's the needs and discover opportunities for addressing them. Number three, we have obtain data for journey maps, personas, use cases, and user stories. So these obtain data for journey maps, personas, use cases, and user stories or store and user stories is field studies help you to understand your users in depth so you can better describe them for your team, right? And lastly, we have number four, test systems under realistic conditions. Yes, so this test system under realistic conditions, you can discover social defects and understand environmental factors before releasing products. Contextual research helps discover things you wouldn't know to ask about, such as problems that crop up when new tools and processes are introduced into existing work practices. Let's proceed to another topic that this topic is very important to us to know. The title is demonstration teaching, which is conduct of demonstration teaching to assess student teacher skills and competencies. So we have the 12 episodes of chapter 4 field study. So episode 1, we have the school environment, meaning to determine the characteristics of a school environment that is safe, secure, and is supportive of learning. Episode 1, the school environment. So physical environment is actually very important. So if you are taking an education program, it is very important, right? And of course, studying in a teacher education institution, dapat nararanasan at nararamdaman din sa mga pre-service teachers like you who are listening right now, yung mga dapat nararanasan at nararamdaman ng mga students or mga estudyante, because that's what you want them to feel. So first is that the physical environment of the school must be conducive for the learning. Conducive for the learning, of course, it must be conducive for learners in many aspects, considering the different facilities of the school. And the next is you should keep the school safe, clean, orderly, and free from distractions, and then maintain facilities that provide challenging activities. Okay, so the school to have a security in order to protect the students, and the school zone is not a military zone. Therefore, any armed people cannot enter the school because, again, schools is promote peace. And of course, cleanliness. Several utility men has to be assigned in every schools to clean. And then, it must be free from distraction as well. And then, of course, it has to maintain facilities that provide challenging activities by providing a weekly or let's say a monthly activity for the students to engage them in different aspects of learning. Because after all, in the 21st century learning, we are not training our students to have jobs. We are training our students for them to create their own job in the future. And then lastly is address physical, social, psychological, and instructional needs of the students because that's the purpose of the school. The purpose of academic institution has to allow the learners to think, but of course to develop the physical to aid the physical development of the learner, social development of the learner, and psychological needs of the students. So the school's visual environment must have four elements. First is decorative. We are not talking about extravagant decoration. We are talking about decorations that are appropriate to school. Next is motivational. Yes, of course, the student need to motivate. As Eva mentioned, a school environment must be conducive for learning and conducive for learners as well. And it has to be motivational, having several corners for the students. Let's say a library. The library of the students must be conducive for learning, and it must have a focus in this on group discussion. Like there are already institutions in the Philippines and abroad that fosters group groupings or grouping corner for the learners to learn in the library section. And it is really motivational to learn with your friends, right? And of course to your classmates. And and to learn with them and grow with them. Okay, next is informational, of course. A school must have bulletin boards. It has to present in this each bulletin boards the vision, mission, goals, and objectives of the school, because that is, yes, of course, the root of the backbone of the school. That's where the curriculum is rooted on that philosophy. So it must be informational. It should contain a bulletin board, must contain necessary information, primarily the BMGO. V is for vision, M is for mission, G is for goals, and O is for objectives of the school. The management should also be there. It also has to have information pertinent to the institution, like if the university was able to benchmarking to other universities and collaborations with other universities, and several information regarding the faculty members that are necessary to be posted, like who are the faculty members of each department. And then the school visual environments must also be instructional, something that is informative and something that can help the learners learn easier. So those are the physical environments that are necessary, but apart from that, classroom environment should also be conducive in general, with considering the lighting that must be appropriate. The temperature must be appropriate, the location, and but that will depend on the nature of the subject and the teacher philosophy as well. For example, for episode 1 is exploring the school campus and its facilitators, observing bulletin board displays. So now, let's proceed to episode 2. Episode 2, learner diversity, developmental characteristic, needs, and interest, which is describe the characteristics, needs, and interests of learners from the different developmental levels. So, we're talking about learning episode 2 of the field study, and it talks about the diversity of learners. So, when you go to a learning institution, there are diversity in the learners' needs, learners' characteristics, learners' attributes. So, bawat estudyante may kanya-kanyang pangangailangan yan, and meron din sila ng field of interest, and you can agree with me. about that matter, especially satin personally, we have our own field of interest. And when you go to a classroom, having at least, let's say, 35 students, each of those learners, kanya-kanyang specific field of interest, this need some specific characteristics. So, this learning episode generally aims to provide opportunity to observe learners of different ages and grade levels. So, it highlights the differences in their characteristics and needs. So, you will be immersed with different classroom situations wherein you are going to observe a first preschoolers and then the elementary and then the high school learners or students, but I think it would depend on the field study instructor or the field study coordinator kung paano niya ibibigay sa inyo ang instructions. There are some cases that if you are in BPED, some instances you will be assigned the language. Let's say grade 7, grade 8, grade 9, the comparison, but if the case permits, or the opportunity permits, pwede kayo magkaroon ng opportunity to observe from preschool, elementary, and the secondary school students. So, you will be looking into the different characteristics of those learners at titignan ninyo ang similarities and differences, those characteristics, and you will try to reflect and analyze their own respective characteristics. So, as a future educator or as a future teacher, it is important to determine your learners' characteristic and needs so that you will be able to plan and implement learning activities and assessment that are developmentally appropriate. So when you become future teachers, of course, there are diversity of learners, and when you prepare instructional materials, when you prepare your lessons, of course, it will vary depending on the needs and levels of the learning ship. For example, magbigay kayo ng exam or mag-discuss kayo ng some of specific lessons. Some of learners will not understand the lesson. That lesson, and when you prepare our draft also examinations, hindi yung ginagamit yung exam sa section 1 at yun gagamitin nyo sa exam for the last section. So, through this field study or through this observation, you will learn how to consider those aspects and crafting or developing your respective assessments and lessons. So, dun makikita na each of particular level has their own corresponding respective needs na kailangan natin i-consider. So, yun ang pinaka-main purpose learning episode 2 na dapat natin matignan kasi kung sa ganun aspects, hindi malinaw ang ating pagpaplano, hindi natin mahihit ang ating learning outcome so that maaari tayong magkaka-provide ng assessments na hindi akma sa kanilang comprehension level. Example for the episode 2 is observing learner characteristics at different stages. So now, here is the episode 3 for field study that focus on gender, needs, interests, experiences, language, race, culture, religion, difficult circumstances, and indigenous people, which is describe the characteristics and needs of learners from diverse backgrounds. Okay, so now we begin our episode 3, which is a much more interesting episode, I'd like to believe, because from the title itself, it's focused on gender, needs, interests, experiences, language, race, culture, religion, difficult circumstances, and indigenous people. So, at the end of the episode, there will actually be three parts of this episode, meaning to say, you would have to answer activities 3.1, 3.2, and 3.3, blah blah blah. At the end of the all these activities, it's expected that you are able to describe the different characteristics and needs of learners from diverse backgrounds. So, you should also be identifying the needs of students with different levels of abilities in classroom, as well as identify the best practices in differentiated teaching to suit the varying learner needs in a diverse class, and of course demonstrate openness, understanding, and acceptance of the learner's needs and backgrounds. So, learning essential about the principle of development, there will be three also, there will be factors that bring about the diversity of learners that highlighted by the past and the focus of indigenous people. So studying this learning essential before conducting the observation would actually help you better understand and would you make better observer so that you could record whatever is important for the episode. And here is the example of episode 3, that observing differences and diversity among learners. Okay, for episode 4, that learner diversity, the community and home environment. So, the episode 3, they have connected for the episode 4, which is describe the influencing factors in the home environment that affect the student's learning. So, I am going to share with you some of topics that are related in this topic from episode 4 of Fields Study. First, we have parenting styles. So, parenting styles is we have authoritarian, permissive, rejecting, neglecting, and authoritative. Second, we have environment. Of course, the environment is very important to develop, to enhance, to know what is it all about. And of course, we have for the environment we have family background, community background, and school. And lastly, we have the learner's development. We have physical development, social development, emotional, moral development, and cognitive development. Okay, episode 5, creating and approaching learning environment, which is plan on how to manage time, space, resources for conducive learning. Okay, remember this is a field study. This expected that you have already taken these courses. I will not be discussing a very detailed discussion on this said topic, but I will be giving an overview on how to create an appropriate learning environment. So when we talk about creating an appropriate learning environment, it talks about the atmosphere of learning. A learner, once he or she enters a classroom, should feel that he or she will grow in that classroom. So, yun ang kailangan natin mag-take note as a teachers for other students to understand, know, and to feel that they will grow in your institution or in your classroom. So, number 1 is that specific classroom rules and procedure are clear. First, as teachers, you must set your own classroom or classroom guidelines and procedures, but take note that the classroom procedure is not only created by you, but this should be first things foremost consulted with the goals and objective, the vision, mission of objective of the school is, so dapat align yung rules ninyo sa rules ng school. You don't just create a rule out of your head. as teacher, but you also have to consult the entire policies of the school when you create the classroom rules. But you can add, but you cannot actually remove a certain class school policy. So, when you create a classroom rule, make sure to consult legal basis, that not just because of hunch. Of course, now it should be clear. Number two, classroom rules and procedures are discussed within the first few days of the school. Number three, students are involved in the design of rules and procedures. Number four, techniques. Techniques to acknowledge and reinforce acceptable behavior are employed. Number five, clear limits for the unacceptable behavior are established and negative consequences for such are communicated. And lastly, we have classroom processes are democratic. And the example of episode 5 is observing management of time, space, and learning resources. And let's go for the episode 6, classroom management and routines, which is identify and describe the classroom routines set by the teacher and how the teacher and how the students execute these routines. Why is it important to establish classroom routines? What do you think so? Of course, establish routine earlier of the school year because you allow the learners to be conditioned with the routine that you do. Take notes. So, routine natin na ginagawa natin sa classroom teachers, there's a different strategies, but again, there's first thing for almost foreign is that greetings should be there and dapat dyan din ang prayers should be there and the basic education may prayers and that's established routine and then pick up is the paper of around you or the down chair. And if you have any others, so that usually yung ginagawa natin sa ginagawa natin. And of course, some schools also have national anthem. Yes, of course, we have a national anthem. And number 2, it enables to run activities daily in a smooth manner. Number 3, helps you maintain order in the classroom. Number 4, makes you focus in teaching because you spend less time in giving direction and instructions. And number 5, enables you to explain to the learners what are expected of them. And the example of episode 6 is observing the classroom routines. For the episode 7, we have physical and personal aspects of classroom management, which is determine the classroom management strategies that the teacher employed in the class. Okay, why is it important for us to have an effective classroom management? So number 1, increased chance of student success. What do you mean by that? Okay, since there is, as I have mentioned in the previous episodes, that the students can have an established routine, right? Okay, like say for example, you're saying good morning. Good morning, ma'am. Good morning, sir. Now they can take that in their future jobs that's a simple greetings, but the influences the perspective of the students of the learner towards working apart from that is inside the classroom. Towards success in the learning is that they can focus more on what more important on that session on the class. 2, paves the way for the teacher to engage students to learning. 3, helps create an organized classroom environment. Increase instructional time. 5, create consistency in the employment of rules and regulations. 5, aligns management strategies with school-wide standards. 7, decrease misbehavior in the classroom. And last, gives students boundaries and consequences. An example for the episode 7 is observing classroom management strategies. Okay, for the episode 8 is encounter with the school curriculum, which is describe how the manages the school curriculum by planning and implants lesson through different strategies and assessment of learning outcomes. What is curriculum for you? What is your own comprehension about curriculum? Of course, curriculum is broadly defined as the totality of students' experience that occurs in an educational process. The term often refers specifically as planned sequence of goal, instruction, and assessment to view the student's experience. For number one is curriculum planning. It's a process of determining and developing goals. And number two, curriculum designing is concerned with the nature and arrangement of the four basic particular parts. Three, curriculum implementation is the interaction between those who have created the program and those who are charged to deliver it. And last, four, curriculum evaluation. The process of delineating, obtaining, and providing useful information for judging decision alternatives involves value judgment about the curriculum. Did we do what we wanted to do? Okay, for example of episode 8 is observing how the teachers and school implements properly the curriculum. Okay, episode 9, preparing for the teaching and learning. Identify the teaching learning practices that apply or violate the principles of teaching and learning. So we have number one, effective learning begins with setting clear expectations and learning outcomes. Number two, learning is an active process. What I hear, I forgot. What I see, remember. What I do, I understand. Learning is a discovery of personal meaning of ideas. Students are given the opportunity to connect what they learn with other concept learned with the real world experience and with their own lives. Number four, learning is a cooperative and collaborative process. And the example of episode 9, observing best practices in the classroom, as well as areas that need to be improved. Okay, for the episode 10 is utilizing teaching learning resources in ICT, which is identify and classify the technology resources that facilitate the teaching learning processes. Okay, the Information and Communication Technology Competency Framework for Teachers, or ICT CFP version 3, is a comprehensive framework guide teachers development on the effective appropriate use of ICT in education. It highlights what teachers should do and do clustered in 6 aspects, namely understanding in ICT education, curriculum and assessment, pedagogy, application of digital skills, organization and administration, and of course we have teacher professional learning. Okay, understanding in ICT education, a school usually sets up a center that will provide valuable support to the teaching learning process. Over the years, the name of this center has evolved. Some of the names are Audiovisual Center, Media and Technology Resource Center, Teaching Learning Technology Department, or simply Resources Center. Curriculum and Assessment, with the shift development of ICT, the natural outcome was the ever-expanding interface between the traditional library and ICT in both terms of hardware and software system and applications. Pedagogy is schools may have different setups when it comes to learning resource center, or LRC. Some have replaced the term library with LRC. Some have a separate library, LRC, and audiovisual or media center. Some only have the LRC both for teachers and students. Still, some have combined their learning and resource centers with maker spaces. And for the application of digital skills, the common purpose among this center is to provide print, audiovisual, and ICT resources to support the teaching learning process. And of course, we have organization and administration. The goals of the center may include orienting and training teachers in the use of audiovisual and ICT resources, working with teachers and administration in producing instructional materials, making available useful resources to the students, teachers, and the school community. And lastly, we have teacher professional learning. In order to support the philosophy and aims of the school, the center must fulfill the following functions: center of resources, laboratory of learning, agent of teaching, service agency, coordinating agency, recreational reading center, and a link to other community resources. And the example of episode 10 is visiting the Learning Resource Center of the school, observing how ICT resources are utilized in teaching and learning. Okay, episode 11 is called Assessment of Learning, which is identify and describe the traditional and authentic assessment tools and tests for learning. Okay, this episode 11 assessment of learning is process of collecting data based on performance, analyzing, and interpreting of data to arrive at a valid result, and also refers to the wide variety of methods of tools that educators use to evaluate, measure, and document progress, skill acquisition, or educational needs of students. Assessment as learning occurs when students are their own assessors. Students monitor their own learning, ask questions, and use a range of strategies to decide what they know and can do. Of course, and how to use assessment for new learning. Okay, no problem with that because we have a function of assessment as learning. So the function of assessment as learning is 1. Encourage students to take responsibility for their own learning. 2. Requires students to ask questions about their learning, of course. And 3. Involves teachers and students in creating learning goals to encourage growth and development, because the teachers and students are always partner, and provides ways for students to use forms and informal feedback and self-assessment to help them and understand the next steps in learning. And 5 is, of course, encourages peer assessment, self-assessment, and reflections. And the example of episode 11 is observing assessment and learning practices. And the last episode, but then not least, of course, we have episode 12, Teacher's Philosophy, which is the teacher philosophy is to determine the prevailing philosophies of education as observed in the classroom, and this relate to the school vision, mission, and goals in K-12 curriculum as a whole. Okay, the example of episode 12 is analyzing DepEd's philosophy of education, articulating personal philosophy and teaching. And that's all my discussion.